Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're peeling back the layers on a situation that, well, many of you might find startlingly relevant.
Yeah, whether you're an employee trying to figure out your rights, maybe you're in HR dealing with policy.
Or a manager, even an attorney in employment law.
Exactly. It touches a lot of bases.
We're digging into disability accommodations, specifically remote work today, and what happens when a system that should support you feels like it's actively working against you.
It really is a story that brings so much to light, doesn't it? The complexities of workplace support, that whole delicate balance of trust,
Oh, absolutely. Fragile is the word.
and the huge impact managerial actions can have on someone's career, their well-being. What's really fascinating here isn't just the what happened, but the why and how.
Right. How could this unfold, especially after a formal accommodation was actually granted?
That's the kicker. It makes you really question what accommodation means in practice.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're really taking a close look at the journey of Johnny. She's an autistic professional, and his story, well, it's a powerful lens on the nuances of disability accommodation.
Mm-hmm.
You shared sources that walk us through Johnny's whole experience, from, that initial win, getting remote work approved, to this just bewildering turn of events that makes you question everything.
Yeah, it really does make you pause.
It's not just about one person's struggle, though, is it? It's about spotting those systemic issues, the potential breakdowns that can happen even when you think the boxes have been ticked.
Absolutely. We'll be pulling out the key insights from this story, connecting the dots between, Johnny's personal experience, the company's responsibilities.
And the wider implications for disability law, workplace practices.
Yeah, exactly. It raises that big question. What does it really mean to accommodate someone properly? Not just on paper, right?
Right, in practice.
And maybe even more critically, what happens legally, ethically, when that accommodation seems like it's being, shall we say, strategically undermined.
Or even sabotaged.
How does a company's policy on paper stack up against the actual lived reality for an employee, especially one who's disclosed a disability?
So let's unpack this. Let's pick it up right where Johnny's hopeful victory took that really sharp, unsettling turn. This is a crucial story, I think, for anyone dealing with disability in the workplace.
Definitely a cautionary tale
Hmm.
and a lesson in vigilance. The promise and the sudden pivot.
Okay, let's set the scene first. Our sources, they paint a really clear picture of Johnny. Autistic professional, and his track record. Stellar. Absolutely stellar.
Yeah, not just meeting expectations. He wasn't just, getting by.
No, not at all. He was called the best performer in the group, and this was while he was working remotely.
Which is key, right? It proves he could excel in that setup.
Totally. It wasn't like some test run. He'd already proven, beyond doubt, he could thrive remotely. His performance was top-notch.
And this leads to a really critical point. His remote work, it wasn't just like a casual request for flexibility.
Not a lifestyle choice.
Exactly. It was a formal accommodation recommended by his neuropsychologist. That changes the game.
It really does. It makes it a medical necessity, recognized by an expert, tied directly to his ability to do his job well.
So the company, HR, they weren't just being nice here. They were responding to a documented medical need, probably under laws like the ADA. That's a crucial distinction.
Right. So when HR greenlit this, the sources describe it as a real victory. You feel that sense of relief, right? Validation, support.
Like the system actually worked for him.
Exactly. A system working as it should. Imagine how that must have felt for Johnny. Finally getting his needs formally recognized, supported.
After probably a difficult process of disclosure and advocating for himself.
It's not just the practical side, the remote work itself, which for many autistic people can be huge for managing sensory input, social stuff, routine.
Yeah, it maintains focus.
Yeah, but it's also that psychological comfort, feeling seen, understood, supported. That approval should have been the start of something stable and productive.
And that initial success, that trust, it's so important because it sets the stage for what comes next. The company acknowledged its responsibility.
But, and here's the but.
Right. It also highlights how vulnerable an employee can become after disclosure, after getting an accommodation.
Even though it's a protected right.
Yes. Suddenly, their status is known. It can change perceptions, how they're managed, or, as we see here, how they might be targeted. It's a paradox, really. You feel secure, but you're also exposed.
Okay, here's where it gets really unsettling. Just 3 weeks. 3 weeks after that victory, that validation,
Right.
everything flips.
Completely upside down.
The sources state flat out. Johnny's manager suddenly reassigned him to a complex process he hadn't touched in over 3 years.
Wow, 3 years is a long time for a complex process.
And get this, no notice, no training, and no ramp-up. Zero support.
So not just a new project, a totally different, intricate area he hadn't done in ages.
It's like being a star runner and suddenly being thrown into a swim meet with no warning, no practice. The contrast is just jarring.
And it wasn't just unfamiliar, it was complex. Without any scaffolding, the training, the prep time that any employee would need.
Let alone someone with specific accommodation needs.
Precisely. The sources say, while on the surface looked operational, maybe a business need.
Plausible deniability, maybe?
Perhaps, but in reality, it undermined the very accommodation that was meant to help him thrive.
So how does that even happen? How can an operational decision just cancel out an HR-approved accommodation?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It points to either a massive communication breakdown within the company about his accommodation,
There's something much worse.
or, something far more deliberate. A calculated move to get around the accommodation without officially changing it. Basically changed his working conditions overnight, setting him up to fail. The manager's calculated awareness and actions.
So there's Johnny, thrown into this complex mess, no support, just trying to figure it out. What happens when he asks for help?
Predictably, he reaches out. And the manager's response, it's incredibly blunt.
What did he say?
According to the sources, if you have a question, call me.
That's it. Call me.
That's it. Not, let's schedule training, or I'll check in with you. Just call me if you have a question.
Wow. That just puts the entire burden on Johnny, doesn't it?
Completely. It implies any failure is his fault for not asking enough, not because he wasn't given the foundation he needed.
It's passive-aggressive management 101. Offer support that isn't really support.
And it totally contradicts proactive support, which is crucial, especially with an accommodation. It forces him to use extra energy just trying to learn on the fly without tools.
It's not just hands-off. It feels like a setup wrapped in a fake offer of help.
For HR, that response from a manager, huge red flag. Either they don't get it or they're actively ignoring the need for real support.
And the sources really show Johnny struggling. He was working hard, under a lot of stress, scared. He knew mistakes could cost the company money.
So he's not slacking. He's trying desperately hard under impossible conditions.
Trying to be extremely careful, but because it was so new and unsupported, it was taking more time than usual.
Which is totally understandable.
But then, despite his efforts, other people started noticing. The team leads started questioning steps Johnny was taking, asking things like, why are you doing that? Or why that way?
So his struggle became public within the team. That just adds another layer of pressure and isolation.
And those questions show that the lack of training was obvious to everyone, right?
Absolutely. It wasn't just Johnny feeling it. His colleagues could see he was floundering. Yet, the source's stress, he was left to figure things out by himself.
It's not just bad management at this point. It feels like deliberately withholding what he needed to succeed.
Creating a visible deficit in his performance. For an attorney, that pattern-depriving resources, public questioning, starts building a case for a hostile work environment.
And then comes the confession. This part is just staggering.
It really is.
Weeks into this nightmare, Johnny's on a call with the manager. He says, understandably, I wish I knew this before the workload transition.
Just asking for the support he should have gotten.
And the manager's response, the sources quote him directly. Yeah, I know, sorry, I threw you under the bus, but I had to do it.
He actually said that, threw you under the bus.
That's what the sources report. A direct admission, I knew, sorry, had to do it.
Wow, okay. That's not a mistake. That's intent. Admitted intent.
Right. It blows the whole operational decision excuse out of the water.
Completely. This moves it beyond mismanagement into calculated action. For HR, that admission, it's not a red flag, it's a 5-alarm fire.
It screams potential discrimination, retaliation.
Especially given the timing, right after the accommodation. For lawyers, that quote is gold. It directly shows motive. It wasn't about business needs, it was about targeting Johnny.
And the sources really hammer home that the manager knew exactly what he was doing. It wasn't like Johnny was the only option.
No, apparently there were other teammates with similar workloads used to the intricacies of this new complex task.
People who were trained and ready.
Right. But the manager specifically chose Johnny. That choice, knowing others were available and better suited, just underscores how targeted this was.
And the manager even understood the difference in workload. He apparently described Johnny's old work as light, something he could do 2 weeks' worth in 1 hour.
Whereas this new workload, the manager knew it was very much volume and complicated by design.
So he knew the huge jump in complexity and volume. The sources say he was conscious and aware that Johnny will struggle.
That level of awareness, combined with choosing Johnny specifically, it points straight to an intent to create an impossible situation. It's just a total disregard for the employee, especially one with a disability and an accommodation.
So, putting it all together, the manager knowingly gave Johnny work he wasn't trained for. Johnny told him immediately, same day, hey, my old experience isn't enough for this.
Raise those red flags right away.
But the manager did not act, did nothing, just let Johnny struggle, leading straight to the mistakes that were bound to happen.
It's not just inaction. It's ignoring a direct warning. Deliberately letting the predictable consequence unfold, the documentation trail, and the set-up-to-fail narrative. So with Johnny left hanging, unsupported, warned his manager, the inevitable happened.
Mistakes.
Yes, mistakes that were preventable occurred. And this is crucial, the sources are adamant. These mistakes were not because of Johnny.
They were because the manager didn't support him.
Exactly. Because of his manager not supporting him, for letting him with no support, it was the obvious consequences of being thrown under the bus. The blame is placed squarely on the manager's setup.
It was engineered.
Precisely. And for an attorney, that causal link is key. The mistakes become the adverse action, stemming from the lack of support, which itself followed the accommodation request.
And this is where it gets even more, sinister. The sources say, write-up started.
The paper trail begins.
Each write-up used the worst vocabulary possible. Johnny neglected, Johnny overlooked something, etc. The paper trail started, and it was obvious.
Oh, that language. Neglected, overlooked. That's not neutral documentation of an error.
No, it sounds like character assassination. It implies fault, carelessness on Johnny's part.
It's building a narrative, fabricating a record to make him look incompetent or negligent, completely ignoring the context of being set up without training.
So they could justify discipline later.
That's the classic pattern. This is textbook retaliation or constructive discharge. You withhold support, performance drops predictably, and then you meticulously document those failures using loaded language.
Creating a fake record.
Exactly. A self-serving record to justify action. It's a systematic way to build a case by manufacturing the evidence yourself.
And it hides the manager's role.
Perfectly. For attorneys, this kind of manufactured paper trail is critical. When you compare the documents to the reality of the situation, the lack of training, the manager's admission, the pretext becomes clear.
It also sounds like constructive discharge, right? Making things so bad he'd have to quit.
It certainly contributes strongly to that claim.
Yeah.
Creating such an intolerable, unsupported environment where failure is inevitable. Yeah, that pushes towards constructive discharge.
The sources just spell it out so clearly. For now, remember, Johnny was set up to fail.
No ambiguity there.
Manager changed his environment with no support. Red flags that Johnny raised were ignored. Errors caused by his leadership setup started being documented as Johnny's mistakes. But it wasn't.
It's just a direct contradiction of everything good leadership should be, isn't it? Managers are supposed to support success, enable people.
Not actively sabotage them.
Right. This manager was doing all the contrary. It's not just bad management. It's actively working against the employee to create a reason for discipline or dismissal.
Which raises huge questions for HR about oversight and accountability.
And the ethics, the legal responsibilities of managers, especially when there's a disability involved. This is the opposite of providing a reasonable accommodation.
And the absolute most critical piece of context, the sources keep stressing this, all after Johnny disclosed his disability to request a disability accommodation to work remote.
The timing. It's everything.
It's not just coincidence. The whole pattern, the workload change, the confession, the paper trail, it all kicked off right after the accommodation was approved.
That chronological link is powerful evidence for a discrimination or retaliation claim under the ADA. It strongly suggests the accommodation request was the trigger for all this negative action. It establishes that crucial causal connection, delayed support, and contradictory feedback.
Okay, so 5 months. 5 grueling months of Johnny working with no training, no real support, just struggling under all this pressure.
5 months is an incredibly long time to be left in that state.
And then the sources say, finally, limited training came. Limited.
Limited after 5 months.
Then it consisted of just 4 to 5 one-on-ones with the support that was needed before a big workload change.
Wow, so a handful of sessions, 5 months too late?
It's almost insulting, isn't it? Too little, way too late. The damage was done. His record, his stress levels.
The fact it took 5 months for even that minimal training, despite his requests, his struggles, the write-ups, it speaks volumes.
What does it suggest to you?
Well, it feels reactive, not proactive. Maybe an attempt to cover tracks. Perhaps the manager realized the paper trail looked too bad. Or maybe HR got involved finally.
Could be. But the delay itself caused so much harm, it let those manufactured mistakes pile up.
Cementing the false narrative of his incompetence. It was like trying to patch a huge hole with a tiny Band-Aid long after the ship started sinking. Legally, that late insufficient support doesn't undo the earlier damage.
But here's the real kicker. This is where it gets even weirder. During those few late sessions, the manager completely changed his tune.
Oh, how so?
The sources say, on each, Johnny manager recognized how Johnny was improving. On each, Johnny's manager gave him positive feedbacks.
Positive feedback from the guy who threw him under the bus.
Yeah. Stuff like, see, just keep doing, what are you doing? You were doing great, and I noticed, good job, you got this, Johnny.
That is whiplash from call me if you have a question and admitting sabotage to you're doing great.
It's a bizarre shift, right?
Absolutely fascinating.
Right.
And legally, very interesting. It screams change in strategy. Maybe he realized the setup was too obvious. Feared legal action.
We're trying to manipulate the situation.
Could be. Create the crisis, document the failure, then offer minimal help and praise the improvement to muddy the waters. It makes it harder to prove the initial intent was bad.
So was it real support finally, or just another layer of the setup?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? For an attorney, this is tricky. The defense points to the positive feedback. See, no discrimination. The plaintiff argues it's a late, cynical attempt to cover up the original discriminatory act.
So what does all this mean for you, our listeners? If you're an employee, HR, a manager, an attorney, there are huge takeaways here. For employees, it's a harsh reminder. Even approved accommodations can be undermined. Sometimes subtly, sometimes, like here, maybe not so subtly.
Yeah, it hammers home how vital documentation is. Your documentation.
Every email, every meeting note, every time you ask for support and don't get it, every time something feels off like you're being set up, keep your own log.
Because as we saw, a paper trail can be built against you. You need your own to counter it.
And for HR and management, this is a masterclass in what not to do.
A painful one. It shows the huge legal and ethical risks of not supporting accommodated employees, especially when it looks deliberate.
It shows best practices aren't just policies on a shelf. They have to be lived. It's about genuine support, not sabotage.
And it highlights the need for real accountability for managers. Getting the accommodation approved is only step one. Making sure managers support it is step two, and often harder.
And for the attorneys listening, this whole scenario is just dripping with red flags.
Oh, absolutely. Discrimination, retaliation, constructive discharge. It's all potentially there. Understanding these patterns, the sudden change, denying training, the confession, the paper trail, the timing, even the weird positive feedback at the end, that's key to building a case.
It all paints a picture of a deliberate undermining. Outro. So we followed Johnny's incredibly tough journey. From being a top performer, celebrated even, to being deliberately, in his manager's own words, thrown under the bus.
All happening right after he sought and got a disability accommodation.
We saw the calculated moves, that shocking confession, the way errors were manufactured into a damning paper trail.
And then that confusing switch to positive feedback right at the end.
It really shows how an accommodation, legally required, can just be completely nullified in practice without anyone officially taking it away.
The sheer audacity of it, especially the manager admitting it, that's what's so striking here. It really forces you to look past the surface excuses, the operational changes.
And question the real motives, right? Especially when it happens right after a disclosure or accommodation.
Exactly. It reminds us that sometimes workplace problems aren't accidents. They're engineered. That manager's candidness, however shocking, gives us a rare glimpse into that possibility.
So what's the bottom line for you listening? Johnny's story, it's more than just one person's struggle. It's a really powerful, if difficult, illustration of how vulnerable employees can be.
Even when they follow the rules, get the accommodation approved, the day-to-day reality can be weaponized against them.
It really highlights why we need to be critical thinkers about workplace issues. To ask, is this person just struggling, or are they potentially being set up?
And it underscores the need to honor the spirit of accommodation, not just check a box.
Which brings us to a really big question for you to think about after this.
Mm-hmm. How can companies really make sure that the spirit of accommodation is followed through, especially when managers have so much power over the daily work environment and how performance is perceived?
And for employees, how do you protect yourself when you feel like you're facing this kind of subtle but devastating sabotage when your own performance is being twisted against you?
The laws are there, yes, but making them work for you often comes down to that diligent documentation, careful communication, and really strong self-advocacy.
Keep those really important questions in mind because, according to our sources, Johnny's story, it is far from over.
Oh, yeah.
And the next part of his journey is going to leave you absolutely astounded.